Let's do this one.
So recently I was watching this very excellent video about how the creators of games like Omori and Undertale are in fact terrible programmers. And I thought,
Thoughts right away. You do not need to be a good programmer to make a game. You absolutely do not need to be a good programmer to make a good, solid video game. As long as it works, doesn't have frame drops, doesn't have like game-breaking bugs, I feel like you can have abysmal code, but if the game is fun, it works, and it isn't like the bugs aren't game breaking, people will enjoy that. For example, I released Martian Red recently, which, by the way, go play Martian Red. So what this game is essentially like a Martian crash lands on a planet, and then you have these two gems that you're trying to get to power your ship. I'll just go complete a level. It's really short. It takes like 2 minutes. It takes me like 2 minutes to beat this game. Right. That's one of the gems. So this gem, right? This gem thingy, this thing right here that I just got, literally one of the last things I programmed, and literally I committed sins to make sure it worked. Because this thing, the way that it's tracking this thing that you have a gem is that the gems are a global variable. They're two global Boolean variables that affect a bunch of stuff in the game. Like, it also affects that like you can't go into this door again because you've already gotten that gem. These were all like literally some of the last things that I programmed for this game. I was about to finish the game. I was like, it's two things that can be a global variable. It's not that unsafe. Nothing else really accesses those global variables. I'm just gonna make them global variables, and I'm gonna be done with it because I wanted to release the game, right? I just wanted the game to be done, and nobody cares because it works fine, and it doesn't break the game at all. The game works perfectly. And I committed some programming sins because you don't want to do a lot of global variables like that, especially for something that's so tiny, because of the fact that it's unsafe. A global variable is a variable that anything anywhere can access and change. So if anything anywhere can access and change that, if I accidentally changed it somewhere else, that could break the entire game, right? So what I'm trying to say is, you don't have to be the best programmer or have the best programming practices to create a game. As long as the game works, as long as it's fun, as long as it's not game breaking programming techniques, I feel like you're fine. Anyways, let's continue the video. That is my thoughts.
Hey, I'm a terrible programmer.
Ooh.
And I was a hell of a lot more terrible when I wrote the piece of code that this video is about. Because when I first started working on what would eventually grow to become my dream platformer game, I was an absolute beginner. And I am not
also thank you, that
exaggerating
ice
when I
dude.
say that. Not even in the slightest. As some of you might know, 2D platformer Asgera was essentially my first ever Unity project. And ask pretty much any game designer, myself included, and they will tell you that is probably not the way you should start out. Conventional wisdom says that you should really start by learning a little bit about as many things as you can. And if a beginner came up to me today and said they wanted to make Ghostrunner X Celeste...
So, here's the thing, right? I feel like the advice is usually to make something tiny, which I agree with. If you want to learn to make video games, make really small games that will teach you on how to make video games, and incrementally make bigger and bigger things until you can make the thing you want to make. There is a little thing that I want to add to that. Everybody has that like dream game project they want to do, right? I feel like you gotta, in order to keep yourself motivated, because for a really long time, when I wanted to make games, I wanted to make one dream game. Either I used to like get started on that one dream game and just like not know what to do and quit, or I would, see the advice of make tiny things, try to make tiny things and not be motivated enough to make those tiny things, because I really, really, really wanted to work on that one big thing, that one dream game that I was always dreaming about. I feel like in order to come up with that motivation, you gotta break that one big giant dream game into smaller mechanics. So for example, let's say if I wanted to make Minecraft, right? If Minecraft is my dream game, I feel like I need to make a lot of smaller, tinier games that is just the crafting inventory mechanic of Minecraft. That is just the mining, the swinging a pickaxe and getting something mechanic. That is just the throwing a seed and getting 2 chickens to breed mechanic. You can break down those big mechanics into tiny little games of their own. That way you're kind of building your dream game, but actually you're just building these small, tiny little games, and you can stay motivated. You're going to learn a lot and actually get stuff out, which, by the way, putting stuff out there so that people can play it is definitely a great way to, one, keep yourself motivated as a game dev, but two, getting other people to actually play something that you're working on gives you a big perspective, because like when you're making a game you get really good at it. For example, I can beat my own game in like 2 minutes, but like an average person it might take like 5 or 7, right? And you kind of get tunnel vision into thinking whatever you're doing is really good, but when when an actual player comes and plays it and you come and see them play it, you tend to see all the decisions that they make versus all the decisions that you thought an average player would be making just because you made them. And that makes you really good at designing stuff for other people instead of just running on intuition. Also, just playing games helps you do that too, but like playing games observantly I feel like helps better.
I would almost certainly be advising them to start with smaller projects. But I had no wisdom, so I jumped straight in with biting off way more than I could chew. My goal was to translate the immensely deep and endlessly compelling movement of Ghostrunner into a 2D platformer. I've always loved highly technical speedrunning games. But what I didn't love in the case of Ghostrunner is how the game completely neglects to teach its advanced mechanics to players, and how little the level design seems to care about developing and testing the player's understanding of them. It's a travesty that the majority of people who played through Ghostrunner thought it was just a pretty good hack and slash game. And it's not like I blame them. If your game requires a series of YouTube tutorials to be great, is it really great? Because for those players who either know about the speed tech going in or take the time to look at a YouTube tutorial, for all intents and purposes, they're playing a different game. This is an example of what happens when the mechanics you give a player aren't supported by the challenges you ask them to overcome. Contrast that with Ultra Kill.
Do I need to play Ultra Kill?
It's part of a wider pantheon of games where designers realize that speedrunning does not have to be limited to just the most dedicated players. I think a lot of designers and a lot of players correlate speedrunning with very tricky and sometimes very unintuitive and obtuse movement tech. And because of that perceived high barrier to entry, a lot of designers don't want to make a game around speedrunning.
Never thought about speedrunning that way, but I guess it's true, because anytime you kind of want to speedrun something, you do end up joining a community where people are very readily available to teach you all the things you need to know to speedrun that. And I feel like one day need that, because not a lot of people speedrun, and I feel like you need to be really accessible in order to get more people to speedrun. But also the fact that like it's just like people like being around other people, and I feel like speedrunning is a very good way of like a lot of people just working together for a unified goal, for no other reason, just to, you know, be proud of each other's achievements, which is really beautiful.
They are always standing on the shoulders of runners that came before.
Yeah, when people come up with a tech together, I feel like it's a victory for everyone, rather than just the person who gets the run, right?
Very lofty goals and a very specific set of movement mechanics that I wanted to implement. The entire goal of Strata, especially at this early stage, was just to make a movement system. But I didn't want just any movement system. I wanted something on par with the games that had inspired it. And I was willing to do as much work as it took to get there. And even though all the mechanics I'm using in this game are very much tried and true, it took an awful lot of creative and technical work to figure out how I wanted those pieces to fit together. So while I did use Ghostrunner as a jumping off point,
I feel like the camera needs to be...
as development progressed.
You need to see what's under you more.
3D game where you can dash in any direction. The closest analog to that in 2D is the 8-way dash, which naturally led me to my final elevator pitch before starting development on the game, which was basically Celeste, but instead of clinging onto walls, you have the slide. And just like in Ghostrunner, that slide would serve as your primary means of chaining moves together and building and maintaining momentum. When we combine it with a dash, we end up with what is essentially Celeste's Ultra Dash with an extra step. But it's in that step where a lot of the game's identity lies. For one,
I want to learn how to speedrun Celeste too.
Substantially.
I kinda learned how to speedrun Minecraft. Still need to get better at the nether part and the end part.
To reward players for every extra frame.
I feel like the overworld part I was pretty good at. Like I could get into the nether in about 8 minutes if I get a good seed.
Jump. It all
which
depends
is fine.
entirely on
It's
the
not the
geometry
best.
of the map in front of you, which launches the skill ceiling for high-level play into the stratosphere. So, an 8-way dash, a slide, and a wall jump. Sounds pretty doable. I started out with the basic movement by copying this tutorial, and after that, it was onto
Dude, the Ben
dash.
Ducks
This
tutorial.
tutorial
No, it's Taro Dev. Never mind. Taro Dev has a really good 2D platformer tutorial too. But there's Taro Dev and there's Ben Ducks. I feel like they have really good 2D platformers tutorials. This is coming from someone who just released a 2D platformer. Yeah, go watch them their tutorials if you want to create a 2D platformer.
and after that,
By the way, Ben Ducks, literally right there.
I
Hold up.
started out with the basic movement by copying this
Right there. Coyote time and jump buffering.
tutorial.
These two have
and
really good
after that,
platformer
it was
tutorials.
onto the dash. Now, to this day, I still have no idea where I went wrong when I was first coding the dash. 3 years later, I could do this in my sleep, and I wouldn't be surprised if during the edit I decided to whip up a little side project to demonstrate that. But for whatever reason, anytime I tried to dash in a direction that wasn't horizontal, it would kind of go skew-if. Like it would go in two different directions as if it was being
Dude does
deflected
visual
somehow. And I
programming.
know for a fact that it wasn't gravity because gravity is
Nice.
disabled for the entire duration of
I
the
don't,
dash.
but dude does.
This left me scratching my head for months. How could I possibly hope to create what is essentially a Celeste fan game if I can't even get the 8-way dash working? Without the 8-way dash, there is almost no vertical movement. There's no wave dashing, and not being able to dash horizontally severely limits my choices when it comes to designing levels. After months of terrible programmer IO butting his head against the wall, eventually pretty good game designer IO had to step in. It is said that limitations breed creativity. And what I realized in hindsight was that I was never going to get to be truly creative until I accepted that this was just a limitation that I had. It's true that at the time of making Undertale, Toby Fox was a really bad programmer, but he was
That is
also
true.
a very wise and very self-aware artist.
I guess so.
It was only by
Yeah, no.
embracing his shortcomings and by
Toby Fox, great artist, great musician, great artist.
designing the game around what he was able to do, that Toby Fox was able to create a game that was entirely personal to him, and align his artistic ambition with his technical abilities in a way that meant he could actually finish the project. And my feeling is that players not only resonated with Undertale for that reason, but it also inspired a lot of people like me. Or, you know, perhaps maybe people like you. That's your call to action for this video, by the way. Of course, you're always more than welcome to leave a sacrifice to the algorithm god if you so choose, but what I really want for this video is for you to start thinking about the idea of making your own games. Because I say again, Toby Fox is a really
Make
terrible
them.
programmer.
But also, I'm gonna give this person
So
a
where
sub.
were we?
sub. Well, like,
Oh yeah, Strata. So at this point in our story, I was finding myself at a bit of
that's kind of why I'm doing
I'd accepted
YouTube
that bashing my
too.
head
I
against
want
a wall
other
trying to
people to
make
make
an 8-way
games.
dash
I mean,
was
also I
not a
want
good
people
use
to
of my
play
time.
games that
And
I
think
make,
making
but
that realization was
others
the
should also
exact
play-
moment that
play and
Strata
make
went
games.
from being Celeste
mainly
meets
make
Ghost
games.
Runner
People play
to
games a
being
lot.
Strata. Let me explain. Is that generally the best way to go fast is to spend as much time on the ground as possible. And being the hyper-intelligent, Strata downloading, IO subscribing GigaChad that you are, you've probably figured out that not being able to dash into the ground changes things pretty substantially. In high-level Strata, the minutia of when you start and end a jump press really matters, because you don't have a button you can press that teleports you back to the ground. And while I did add a feeble double jump to add some of that vertical space back in, by its very design, Strata is probably one of the most horizontal platformers out there. And while Celeste is able to accomplish an awful lot with its vertical space, Strata's design is fundamentally different. And it's not like I don't use the vertical space quite liberally in my level designs. It's just that movement on the vertical plane
I
is very
feel
precise
like
and
what he could take, I mean, he's probably gonna get to it, but what he could take a lot of inspiration from for level design specifically is Grand Poo World Speedrun. A lot of like horizontal platforming design happens in a lot of like Super Mario World, just because there's a lot of like going forward techs that they utilize. I feel like he could really take inspiration from all like the Kaizo Super Mario World level designers. Like,
I don't know.
literally, it's
I
just
feel
like
I'm
there's
missing
not a
out
lot
on
of
trying to get
vertical
the
movement.
get the super
There's some
programmers
vertical
involved with
movement,
some
but yeah,
sort
like
of
the goal is horizontal movement, not vertical movement. He
lazy
just cleared
river
it really
approach.
fast, so I can't even explain what I'm trying to say. Okay, there you go. See, like there's not a lot of
Oh my god, I tried to keep my eyes
vertical
open, they almost
movement here.
exploded out of
It's
my
mostly
face.
the goal is horizontal movement, and then you're just kind of using the text and the level to accomplish the horizontal movement. Like in general, I feel like a lot of Mario World hacks try to get you to do those like horizontal text, and I feel like this game could really benefit from that.
Technical. Whereas the horizontal movement is very fast and fluid. And to my mind, it's the rapid switching between these two disparate gameplay styles that makes Strata unique. And that was only possible because I accepted my limitations and allowed myself to create within them. My goal here is to demonstrate that game design is something we do as people all the time. So, it's the weekend, and you and 9 other friends are off to your local basketball court for some five-a-side. Unfortunately, one of your mates has got into a fight on Facebook with one of the local wizards. Happens to the best of us. In an act of petty revenge, this wizard has removed a triangular section from one side of the basketball court, meaning no matter what you do, you and your friends cannot have a fair and balanced game. Using basketball as a jumping off point, how can you change the rules such that all 10 of you can still have fun? If you come up with something, anything, you have just designed a game. In exactly the same way that making a D&D campaign or
That's
your
literally,
family's
yeah,
house
that's
rules
a
for
good way
Monopoly
of
is game design. At
putting
its
game
core,
design
a game
together.
is just two things. It's a set of tools and a set of rules.
I did this same thing with a friend of mine. So like I recently went on a trip and we had a deck of Uno, but we were kind of getting sick of playing Uno over and over again. So what a friend of mine and I kind of came up with is using the cards in Uno to play a game of werewolf where one card can mean that you're a wolf, number cards can just mean you're villagers, a similar thing like that. But essentially pointed it out to my friend after we came up with the whole thing is that like what we just did is game design. And this friend is, by the way, not even remotely close to like the tech world at all. They were kind of really impressed by the whole thing. It's like, well, that is essentially what game design is. You use the tools that you have to create an experience, and then anybody can go through that experience. That's pretty much all game design is.
I've been back on the grind for a few weeks now, and I have a beefy update for all of you. In order to strike the best balance between the game's already budding competitive scene and the fact that it's actively in development and a long way from finished, I've decided to adopt a sort of seasonal model for the speedrun.com leaderboard. This video marks the beginning of Season 1. Whenever I drop a patch, each player will then be awarded points based on all of their leaderboard positions for that season, and a season champion declared. I haven't quite decided on what the
This is a
reward for season
nice
champion
way to go. Honestly, like a lot of game developers, especially like where I'm from, don't think about like a lot of the different communities that exist within games. Speedrunning is a very specific gaming community that a lot of people just don't think about while making a game. I mean, he mentioned why, because making a game for speedrunners feels like you're making a game with very specific tech that maybe normal people might not end up enjoying, which is not true though, because like Celeste is really fun to play even if you don't know any of the speedrunning techs. Minecraft is really fun to play if you don't know any of the speedrunning techs. Mario 64 is the most speedrun game of all time, and it is one of the most fun games of all time as well. People designing games need to be wary of more community. For example, what this guy's doing, if you can create a speedrunning community behind your game before the game is even launched, I feel like once the game is launched, that speedrunning community would just carry your game towards everyone, because speedrunners also really like documenting their gameplay. And it doesn't have to be stuff like speed, like it can be stuff like cozy gamers, right? There's a lot of people that really enjoy cozy games, and you can create a game that specifically caters, or you can even create a normal, like a game that's not a cozy game but has mechanics that would be appealing to cozy gamers. Like, for example, Cult of the Lamb. Cult of the Lamb is a roguelike. It's a very action-based roguelike, but a bunch of cozy gamers enjoy Cult of the Lamb because of the fact of like all of the sort of villager mechanics in Cult of the Lamb that exist. So stuff like that I feel like is really helpful. And I feel like a lot of like game developers and designers don't think of that, although they should be thinking about their target audience at all time. I don't know. I feel like I run into a lot of designers that do not think about their target audience as often as they should. Go sub to their channel. It's a cool channel. I already subbed. I already liked. Go sub to their channel. I Own Music for some reason is what their channel is. I feel like they just forgot to rebrand. But yeah, that was a cool video.